Hey there guys, and welcome back. So if you are watching this shoot, I screwed up this word earlier today too, at the time of recording. If you are watching this at the time of recording, then you have gotten a double feature. We have done 2 code reviews in one day. As you can see, I had my 2 hours starting just before lunch and then finishing right before dinner. So we are back to see what I got done, which unfortunately is not a full combat demo. I did a lot in the demo, but we did not quite get there. So let's go ahead and run through all these changes that we see here on the GitHub and go over what we've got at this point. And as always, I will rearrange my windows so I can see the GitHub and you guys can't. So let us start off just on English.json, just because it's a very simple update. I added characters to the English.json. I had talked about this with the character dot let's grab that character.js. The fact that we have IDs and we're not doing anything with them, and how that was probably what I was going to do with the IDs. Well, that is exactly what we've got right now. So that is there we go. So obviously just spilled this in. Wow, okay, it is late right now. Also, if you hear any humming in the background, I paused my printer to record this, so one of those things. You just kind of have to deal with my printer fan. Fortunately, it's not actually printing, so it's not nearly that bad. So fix that, and then I reworded this. So my initial intention was actually to have this like this, a classic, emblematic of destructive force. You know, written like that. I forgot the colon, and then when I realized it, I was like, you know what, let's be more explicit. Let's skip the colon and just say a classic weapon emblematic of destructive force. Little tiny thing, just mentioning it. So, alongside this character, the other changes that we had are some of the other changes at any rate are in character. First off, I put super at the bottom, which is not kosher. The best I've got for the explanation for why super was at the bottom, because I never put super at the top for Python, is it may be a C++ thing, and I might have had it stuck in my head from C++, that super goes at the bottom. That's the best I got to explain to you. I mean, it's the only thing come with why super would ever be at the bottom, because that's not normal for me. But it was at the bottom. I moved it to the top where it needs to be. Otherwise, I had forgotten to actually assign items. So one of those things, real quick, copy paste from weapons and then just rewrite, change weapons, weapons to items. And that was a quick fix in character. Next up, okay, we had a quick fix in callback. I noticed this while we were doing the stream earlier today. This was character.hp instead of character.currentHP was set to the new value. That would have been a pretty hilarious mix-up in the middle of combat to find out that your character's max HP went down when you healed. Let's see, what to hit next? I don't think there's anything else small to go over. Everything else is really big. Oh, I guess there is one more small thing. I take back. I lied to you. Over here. Evidently, I've got a... I forgot about this, I think. I think I knew this at some point, but... Game.run demo unfortunately will not bind will not bind this reference to itself when you assign it to onClick like this. So I had to bind a game, and now it worked. That was an error otherwise. And now on to the big things that had to happen. So over here in game.js we had, well, there should be something small up top here, right? Let's see. I did a couple more imports up top, which, you know, little tiny things, nothing really to mention. Updated the descriptor here of the parameters. And let's see. I added extra notes, documentation throughout here. I had left this pretty bare because I was hammering it out really quick in the first iteration. So I came back through and I threw a whole bunch of notes in here. That's the first thing. And then down here on Run Demo, this is where the bulk of the work went into today, because I was trying to get the demo up and running. So, first things first, I forgot to do new on all this stuff. So, new equipment did not work because... equipment did not work. Equip.weapon did not work. So we fixed that. We added new there. And we already had this part right here, right? Just with player. But because I wanted to display on the main screen both the player and the enemy, I just took this very simply. Once I got all this written out, because I still had to add, I believe we had up to here filled in. And then I still had to add armor and items. So once I had that designed, then it's a very simple cut and paste into a new function that just takes a character. And then just relabel everything from this.player to Kara. And then obviously down here, output character, this player, enemy, easy peasy. Then we got to the new combat part. Enemy, actually, I take that back, sorry. Obviously, we created the new enemy as well. And this is more or less just a copy paste from down here. And just changing a couple things. So we already had starting character, created a new starting character. Just copy that code up and then change, for example, ID to 1 instead of 0. Rolls to enemy. And then equipment to weapon 1 instead of weapon 0. And then took his healing away. So very simple changes for the enemy that we're going to fight in this demo. And then we start talking about the actual combat itself. So initialize a new combat, this.player enemy. And then I needed something that would determine what the player's doing. I decided to actually give the player a little bit of an AI. It's a very basic AI, but an AI nonetheless. So basically, if the player is below half health and he has healing potions, repair bots, if he has repair bots, then use the repair bot. Otherwise, attempt to attack with a weapon, and then put that on the player queue. Okay, now you're going to see event in here. We'll get to that in just a second. Things I did not get to are down here, so we're going to skip this right here. And then this is the next big thing right here. So you see this add event listener for start, use weapon, use item. So this start loop player AI.bind this. So that is what this event is. And basically I was trying to decide in the back of my mind as I was typing how I was going to interact with the combat loop. Because if we come over here to combat, there we go, combat, the combat loop, which is, there's the event listener stuff. We'll get to that in just a moment. The combat loop calls itself. It is its own running loop separately. So that would mean that I have a couple options. One is to run a loop alongside of it and periodically send stuff to the combat alongside of it. That is a way to do it. I just didn't particularly like it. And the alternative is to get a way to interact with the combat loop, which in theory could be events. And I figured that was the way to go because it actually is very useful for us to be able to get events from combat, especially if we're outputting things that happen in combat to the screen. So I went ahead and set that up. So if we come up here, we can see that right here, event types. I set up a bunch of different event types. At first I just had these 4, and then I realized that for displaying when weapons and items are used, it would be useful to also have this. So once I had these event types set up, again at the beginning it was just these 4, and then these were added later on as I realized it would be useful to have them. Set up this .listeners and then made a subcategory for each of these event types. Now right now, this object right here is using the symbols as the keys instead of the strings. That is just a choice of mine. It could have been strings, and basically what that requires me to do now is make this function right here, which takes a string, converts it into the symbol if it's a valid symbol, and otherwise checks to make sure that anything passed into this after conversion is a valid symbol. So if it was a valid symbol, then we don't have to worry about anything. But if they passed in instead of event types, let's say they passed in weapon types or something like that, then that would be an invalid symbol, and therefore we would return here. We would not add the event listener or remove the event listener, is what it basically boils down to. In reality, as this note says, we should really just raise an error. However, that is not what's happening right now with the code. Right now we're trying to keep this as simple as possible, and therefore we are not raising errors in the code. Again, something that probably should happen, but because we're trying to keep this minimalist and simple, we are just returning silently. Otherwise, we just return the converted event type, assuming it needed conversion. If it didn't need conversion, then it just returns as is. So that gets called in all three of these functions: add, remove, and trigger event. Now, one thing to say about all this, as you can see, I coded all this myself. However, it's one of these things, if I had more time, if I wasn't trying to rush through this, I would have went through MDN or something like that and seen if there was a prototype or something that I could either extend or add onto this combat object that would take care of all that stuff for me. But because I'm rushing through and I don't know that off the top of my head, I just hard-coded it. It honestly did not take that much time to hard-code all this. One of those things. I've gone over event listeners in other programs before, like for example in the animation program. It's pretty much trivial. It's not that big of a deal. It's just check if it's already in here and check if it's valid first off. If it's not valid, then go back. Check if it's already been added. If it's been added already, then go back. And then otherwise append. Now the difference between, I noticed JavaScript, I was looking at the MDNs for add event listener just to make sure that, just to check what it returns rather. And it returns nothing evidently. Unlike, for example, take tk-enter, which returns an ID for the callback, and then you use that ID to unregister. This you actually pass the callback back in to unregister it. And again, that's all this code is. It just checks to make sure it's valid event type, and then checks to make sure that the callback actually is in that event type. And assuming all that is cool, then Splice just removes it from the list. Easy peasy lemon squeezies. And then we have trigger event. So at any point in the combat loop or combat stack where I want to trigger event, or down here in handle weapon, I have not added this yet, but handle weapon, handle item are also going to have their own callbacks as previously noted up here. Again, these were late additions. But at any point, at any rate, you can see start combat. So this is the start loop event right here. Call trigger event with the events.start loop. So that comes into here. We validate it. It should honestly always be correct because we're calling it from our script. In theory, somebody using this script could also call it manually themselves, but that's beyond the point. Otherwise, we pass in combat, player, enemy. So combat has everything, all of this stuff already. Well, not this. I'll get to this in half a second. But it has this other stuff already, the player and enemy. I just decided that it would be nice to have a shortcut to it instead of going the event.combat.player and event.combat.enemy. We can just go event.player and event.enemy. Just saves us a couple keystrokes, so I figured that was worth adding in there. And then it also has this time, and I decided to add this in there because I figured it will be useful at some point. I don't know when, but I've included a start time up here, which is the start of combat time, and a now time right here for the event, the time that the event was triggered. And off the top of my head, things that this may be useful for is damage over time effects. If we have a combat that is dynamic. Now, again, that part, the dynamic combat part, is outside of the realm of the game as far as I can tell, because again, this is a minimalist game based off of A Dark Room. And as far as I can tell, A Dark Room does not have any time-based effects in the game. But, for example, if we had a nuclear reactor melting down and the player had just so much time to fight his way out the front door to escape, you know, that would be a useful use for time as a callback in the event to constantly check that to see if everybody dies and everything explodes. So that is an option for what we can use time for. Again, it may be extraneous at this point because of the scope of the game is so small, but I figured it was worth adding in there. We also have this additional data off in here, and this is just any extra stuff that would be added in, and that just gets assigned straight to the event. And actually, that should be event. Whoops. Event. So it gets assigned to this object, this guy right here. There we go. That was a mistake. It is now fixed. So we then obviously pass this on here. Now we do not have any logic in here to cancel the event. So for example, at start combat, in theory, a callback could, for example, return false or something like that. from its callback, and then we might say, okay, combat is now officially over. That's a possibility, but we're not handling any of that right now. That's just something that we may add in the future, and therefore I put a to-do to consider that. And that covers events. So again, added in my trigger events here. So start a combat, end a combat loop, start a combat stack, end a combat stack, and then we will be adding more to handle weapon and handle item. So that is the rundown on all of that. And let me tell you, as I was running through this, I was at about the half an hour mark on the second hour. So about an hour and a half in, so 5:30-ish. If I recall correctly, where's the readme? Yeah, so about 5:30-ish. I was at about half an hour in, and I was like, you know what? We got this. Half an hour should be more than enough to get done here. And can I tell you, every 15 minutes I was like, okay, no. 15 minutes left, we'll totally get this demo done. 5 minutes left, maybe, and obviously we did not get the demo done. So that was kind of really frustrating that we did not get this demo done. Again, in order to finish this demo, I actually need to fill these things out in order to display when attacks happen, because simply getting the start a combat stack, let's say as an example. So right over here, start a combat stack. If we come to that, you can see this passes in player commands and enemy actions as two additional things that go onto the event. Well, that's nice and all, but I don't know how those resolve or what happens with them. So that's why I had to add in the events for handle weapon and handle item to see what exactly happens with them and how they resolve. So that is the reason why we are not technically done right now, because in order to output it to the main page over here, we're going to have to parse the effect, or I think we need to, in my opinion, we need to parse the attacks as they happen, or the item uses. So that is the deal there. Now let me run through really quick the rest of the changes, see if we have anything else that I missed. Let us see. Oh, that is, I don't think I said this one. That was a rather important mistake on my part. The load equipment. I forgot IDs. I totally forgot IDs. So as we discussed last time, this equipment.json, I said that the ID would be its index in these arrays. And I said that, and I totally forgot that I have to assign that manually over here. And the reason I'm doing that dynamically is so that, again, a matter of upkeep, I could go ahead and say this is ID 0, this is ID 1, but then I have to actually dig through all the equipment in order to figure out what is ID what and whatever. So it's one of those things. It just makes it less error prone for updating these files by not adding in the IDs here and just having this handle the IDs. Now, there is obviously the benefit of handling it over here in equipment.json in that it is always going to be permanently the same thing. But at the same time, I'm assuming at this point that I'm not going to start rearranging these like this. So it's one of those things. Like I said, I think it makes sense like this. It makes it a little bit easier for the upkeep, and I value that. That is what I value. So that is a change I had to make, is setting the IDs. And let's see what else we got. A bunch of comments down here. I didn't add the comments. And then get strings. Actually, that is not something we had before. So get strings. I mentioned that we'd have to be using this dictionary, this object right here, this JSON, to look up what to display on screen. So that is what I implemented here with get strings. So go ahead and delete this now. I don't need these feedback anymore. That was just to double check myself. So we look at object.constructor.name here in order to get the object name. And then we have just a very simple switch case here. So if it's a character, then we look in language.character. If it is a weapon or weapon type, then we determine which of those two objects to pick off of to get the ID, and both of them end up in language.weapons. So the ID obviously the weapon itself does not have an ID because in an instance, the weapon type has the ID. So if object.weapon_type is undefined, that would mean that this is a weapon type itself because it does not have a weapon type attribute. And therefore, we would just have object.id. But if it's not undefined, if object does have a weapon type, that means that it's weapon. And therefore, we need to go object.weapontype.id. And that's the same thing down here with item. So just translate down over here. And then I have this default case down here for anything else. And again, very simply at the very bottom here, and I didn't comment any of this, but as you can imagine, this dict that is our lookup, right? So it's going to be language.item, language.weapon, armor, etc. And then we just look up the ID and return that. And that will return, not JSON. That will return, this right here. So the dict is these arrays right here. That is the dict we're talking about, the dictionary lookup we're talking about. And then the index is each of these individual entries in the array. So that is how that whole entire setup works. And I just minimized that for some reason, the GitHub, to see if there's anything else that we need to look at. I do not think there's anything we need to look at this point. So I don't believe this shows any sensitive information right here when I click this button. Oh, although I should not have started that on this file. It does matter which file I started on, I found out. I need to start it over here. Let's stop that and go there. There we go. And then let me go ahead and get this set up in the in the scene. Make sure that it is grabbing the correct window. There we go. All right, there we go. So push live. Here we go. So this is what I've got so far, and let me just make sure that that's displaying correctly on the preview window. Yep, it is. All right, cool. So when I hit the start game button, this will start the demo. And as you can see, this is what we've got so far printed to the screen. And then combat at this point would ensue. And then I do a combat log down here for the time being. Again, the end goal is to get this to be, the display to be set up just like a darkroom, to have the same exact layout so that it mimics darkroom. But just for this quick demo at the beginning here, we're not going to do that because, again, that's going to require CSS and formatting and whatnot, and that is going to take a lot of time. So that will happen eventually, just not in the near future. Otherwise, as you can see here, player character, we've got the hover text right here, which actually you cannot see. That's amazing. I am actually surprised you can't see that. Let me check this really quick, see if I can use this scene instead. Because that should be part of the window, but I guess it's a brand new window that the Edge window brings up. Yeah, I mean, that's just a local IP, so it doesn't matter if I show you this one. Yeah, okay. Let's use this. This is the good old Fusion desktop, which means that this is exactly a desktop capture, so you can see everything. So there we go. So I did put the titles in here so that you can hover over to get information. Just a little added bonus for the demo. Space Brigand. Just like the terrestrial type. Just in space! So yeah, anyway, that was a little bit of fun I had. Adding the hovers in here. And hovers, just for the record, let me go over to VS Code. All the hovers is where are we at? Game is where we're at. All it is the title attribute for the record. So you just set the title attribute and you get the tooltip. Easy enough. And everything is basically just strings.flavor, strings.name. That's all any of that is. So that is simple enough to understand. I didn't really feel the need of commenting all the HTML because you should be able to, in theory, figure out the HTML. I would hope. Otherwise, we got to take a few steps back here. I don't mind doing so many comments rather in the JavaScript, but I don't plan on commenting the HTML. So that is everything. We are a little short of a half an hour on this one, just keeping track of where we're at. Had I gotten the combat demo done, that probably would have been more like 40 minutes, because we'd probably spend another 15 minutes talking about the rest of the stuff, but that's not where we're at. So by the next time, we should finally have an automated combat demo log at any rate done, which will be very nice. That will be a good payoff. And then we got to start figure out what we're doing after that. And by we, I mean I have to figure out what I'm doing after that, because it's not going to take me more than an hour to figure that out. And we do 2-hour sessions. So I'm going to need something else to work on. The question is it going to be the map? I think it probably should be the map. Obviously, we have not done anything on the map yet. So very likely the map is going to be next. And then after map events, and then after map end events, then I believe I'm just on to actual CSS and formatting on screen. The outputting all the information to the screen. Maybe bad idea to wait till the very end to do all that. Might be a better idea to start mixing that in as we go, but I'll figure out how I want to handle that as we go. Otherwise, I guess I'll hop over to GitHub. Oh, GitHub is minimized, so you're seeing a blue screen right now. There we go. So that is everything we got done in session 4. Session 4 got done in a single day, which is nice. So we are definitely booking it along. Session 4 means that we are 8 hours into development. Again, I was talking about maybe 80 seems like a reasonable amount of time. With combat already done, I know that sounds like we've gotten a lot done already, but I don't really think it is. I think there's still a lot more that needs to go that, we may just not be perceiving. And by we, I mean, if you're looking at this and saying, oh, wow, he's already got combat solved, so what more is there? I'm pretty sure there's a lot more. So I'm not going to call this one, fourth of the way through. Because, combat, events, map, CSS are my 4 big categories I keep on talking about. I'm not going to call this quarter way through at 8 hours, which would bring us to 36 hours of development time. Definitely not there. My conservative estimate is 80 hours to get this done, which would be 40 of these sessions. Although, again, when we get to the later portions of it, the stuff that's going to require that I'm going to work slower on because it's outside of my normal comfort zone. Once we get to that stuff, then it's no longer going to be 2-hour sessions in a half-an-hour recap. It's going to be however long in a half-an-hour recap, however long I need in order to get to make progress, to make a reasonable amount of progress. So it is not literally 40 episodes in this not development blog that you can expect. It may be 80 hours, but it will be heck, for all I know, maybe it will be 20 episodes is what we'll come down to. But anyway, that's the game plan for right now. As always, things can change. We are adaptable. That's fine. And yep, that is everything from me. So if you have been watching, thank you. And as always, I hope you have a great and wonderful day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're at in the world. And I will catch you next time.